Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to be talking about our internal skeleton and the formation of what we call long bones. Now I'm not going to be talking about the skeleton in terms of the general anatomy and the names of all of the bones. That I'll do in another video. This is just to refer to the sort of the benefits of having a skeleton that we know as being an internal skeleton as opposed to one that certain organisms have that is on the outside of their body, which is an external skeleton. I'm going to talk about the structure of bone and how bone goes from essentially being from cartilage into actual strong bone. Now, an internal skeleton, as shown by these particular organisms that I've got on this slide here, all these different creatures, you can see these skeletal structures is so much more advantageous compared to having one that is on the outside of our body. It provides a framework for the body, having an external skeleton. So I'm actually going to list these reasons on this first slide. So one of the reasons why having an internal skeleton is advantageous is because it provides a framework for the body. It also can grow with the body. But more than that, if you look at your own skeleton, you'll see that, or you wouldn't be able to see, but we have tendons that join muscle to bone and ligaments joining bone to bone. So it's very easy to attach muscles to the bones when inside. So it is easy to attach muscles to the bone. And the last thing that I can think of as to why it's beneficial to have an internal skeleton as opposed to an external one is from the point of view of flexibility. It's much more, or allows for a greater level of flexibility if the skeleton is on the inside. So that's just some reasons as to why an internal skeleton is advantageous to an external one. But I want to in this video talk about how the skeleton is formed and actually more about bone structure. Now we've got a few diagrams here that I'm just going to talk you through. Now, bone consists of a mineral component of calcium phosphate and many different collagen fibres. When you look at a vertical section of a long bone microscopically, you can see it has many different components. You have a hollow shaft or diaphysis shown here with an expanded head or epiphysis at each end. So we've got a proximal epiphysis, so this is more towards the head end, because proximal means refer to the head, and distal more towards our feet end. But we have sort of enlargements of that diaphysis called an epiphysis at both ends. We can see that there is articular cartilage over the head of the bone. Now, cartilage is protective. It protects from friction and rubbing of one bone against another. When bones start to rub against one another, they wear away, as what happens in osteoporosis. So we have this articular cartilage covering the head of the bone. And you can see that the shaft is composed of two different types of bone. You've got compact bone on the outside here, while primarily the expanded ends are composed of spongy, what are called spongy bone. It's got spongy bone here and here. And we can see compact bone looks, as the name suggests, it's more tight, more compacted in together, whereas the spongy bone, there seems to be sort of little gaps between them, if you like. There's almost what looks like little pockets of air spaces in a way. Now, that spongy bone is made up of what's called trabeculae. you have these little bony struts, these bony bits in the spongy bone containing what are called Trabeculae. It's this kind of, looks like these little spaces between these bits of bone that make up the spongy bone. Now you have fatty yellow marrow in the hollow shaft, and that's shown here. So you've got yellow marrow within the shaft, but there is red marrow within this trabeculae, if you like. So there is red marrow contained within the spongy bone within the trabeculae. So what on the right hand side of this picture, what we've got here is a head of the femur showing both the red and yellow marrow. So we've got the central yellow marrow here, and then you can see around the outside this red marrow forming this spongy bone. Now, if we look at the picture on the left, we see what's called an epiphyseal line. In fact, I'm just going to highlight that quite in an exaggerated way. Because it's really important. That epiphyseal line or epiphyseal plate is where we get growth occurring in our long bones. Now, interestingly, the fetal skeleton, with the exception of the skull and the clavicle, which begin as bone, consist of cartilage. And at this epiphyseal line or epiphyseal plate that we have, that is cartilage. And starting at 8 weeks, cartilage is slowly replaced with calcium and phosphorus. Now, when that happens, when calcium and phosphorus get into that epiphyseal plate, they turn that cartilage into bone. And that process of bone formation we call, I'm going to put it up over here, we call ossification. So ossification is the process of bone formation. And you can use it to determine whether a person is still growing by looking at the extent of ossification. In fact, when we try to age mummies, for example, that are found in regions like in Egypt, by looking at the level of ossification, you can determine actually what age the mummies are. Because the older that a person is, the greater the level of ossification, the more of that cartilage at that epiphyseal plate has been turned into bone. Now, cartilage consists of numerous connective tissue fibres. It's compressible and it's elastic to withstand weight and absorb sharp sort of mechanical shocks. And it also has collagen fibres providing resistance to stretching. Now, that's a little bit about cartilage, but the bone is clearly a lot harder. It has great tensile strength and compressible strength. But long bones can be broken with a sharp knock. And it should be said that elderly people with osteoporosis are actually more prone to fractures. So that's just a little bit about the epiphyseal line and the formation of bone from cartilage by the replacement with calcium and phosphorus. Just to go back just for a moment to talk about the red marrow, because that's really important. The red marrow is found mainly in flat bones such as the pelvis, the sternum or the breastbone, the cranium or the skull, the ribs, the vertebrae, the scapula and the end of the long bones such as the femur and humerus. Now, a question that often gets asked is the function of that red marrow. Now, red bone marrow contains the cells called hematopoietic cells. That's hematopoietic cells, and they are the ones that create new blood cells. So the red marrow is actually where we get the formation of our red blood cells, and that's why it's really important to mention. So in this video, that's just a little bit about the benefits of an internal skeleton and the structure of our long bones. Okay, I hope all that helps.